Does anybody know what we're celebrating later tonight?
Purim.
Purim. So instead of going back to Matthew, I decided to go with Esther. We are going to have a visitor later that will tell us a little bit about Esther, but I wanted to also teach on it. So Esther is only one of only two books that is named after women. Most people know that. Esther does not have a mention of God or his name throughout the whole book. But there are four places that it shows up in an acrostic form. The first letters of these verses: Esther 1:20, Esther 5:4, Esther 5:13, and Esther 7:7. A place in there you will see, if you looked it up in Hebrew, the tetragram or the four letters of Yehovah. And it's not like it's basically hidden in plain sight. But not only this is there the four, there is a fifth one that it didn't tell me where it was found. I searched the internet, but I couldn't find it. But it actually says I am, rather than Yehovah. So I think that's a pretty deep clue that Yehovah is hidden within these pages. And as we read through, there's a lot of things hidden in Esther. So I was hoping to pull out some of the attributes of Esther that are hidden within the passages of Esther. Turn with me to Esther 2:1-7. Like I said, we're not going to read the whole book, but we're going to read some snippets here. After these things, we're reading Esther 2:1-7. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Does anyone remember this story and who Vashti is? Can you tell me who Vashti was, Candace?
It was the first queen that Ahasuerus had, and she didn't want to come out when he asked her to, so he got really upset because it made a bad reputation for him.
And he banned her from his kingdom. So Vashti was banned from the kingdom because she would not do what the king asked her to do. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarters under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young women who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So in verse 7, we learn about Hadassah. This is her Hebrew name. It means myrtle tree. I don't think there's anything significant about it, but it means a tree. And this tree grows to about 15 feet tall, and it will grow purple or pink or white flowers on it. It will only grow one of those colors. It won't grow all three at the same time, but it will grow some of those colors. So those are the three different colors it has. She was orphaned, and she was adopted by her older cousin Mordecai. But it notes here that she was very beautiful. So we continue on. Esther 2, 8 through 10. So it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. So here we see this hidden thing again, this fact of who she is and where she comes from. But we see that she pleased Haggai, and he favored her. He gave her favor because she had pleased him. We're going to continue. We're going to skip down to Esther 2, 17 through 20. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight, more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. This was after a year of preparations, of training, of teaching her how to serve the king and be a queen. Not her, but many other women. And as she learned these things, she also pleased the king. And he obviously favored her and made her queen. And he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. When the virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. Esther was made queen. She's still keeping her lineage hidden, but she obeys Mordecai like her own father, even though she's queen. I hope you're seeing an attribute here to this that's sort of hidden. It doesn't call it out. We'll finish here, Esther 2, 21 and 23. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when the inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. It is written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So we hear Mordecai is at the city gates. So he's not, he's an important person to be sitting at the city gates. But he hears this plot to kill the king. So he tells Esther, and Esther, in Mordecai's name, she could have came and said, well, guess what I heard, king? No, she came and said, I heard this from your gatekeeper. I heard this from Mordecai, the gatekeeper, that there is a plot to kill you. I hope you're seeing humbleness here. She's very humble and doesn't take it upon herself to gain these accolades. She pleased the servant Haggai. She pleased the king by serving him. And she also served her adopted father with humbleness. So, in chapter 3, we read through Haman plots to kill the Jews. That's the major part we're taking away from this part. I'm just going to skip through that. And we're going to pick back up and look at another tribute of Esther and who she was. Esther 4, 7 through 17. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Haddish returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Haddish and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if they remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So this young woman knew that she may perish just by going in front of the king. But she decides to appear before the king. In Esther 5:1, we see, "Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in a royal house facing the entrance of the house. She went and faced her fear." What do we see here? What a hidden attribute. Courage, bravery. We see humbleness and bravery. Let's go to, let's finish Esther 5:1 through 8. I'll just pick up in verse 2. So 2 through 8. "So it was when the king saw Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, 'What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom.' So Esther answered, 'If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him.' Then the king said, 'Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said.' So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, 'What is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done.' Then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." So now we're going to skip ahead to Esther 7, 1 through 6. Are you starting to see what this third attribute is? What it might be? Let's go ahead and read 7, 1 through 6. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther, and on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and it pleases the king, let my life be given to me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose, and in his wrath from the banquet of wine, and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw the evil was determined against him by the king. Esther was smart. She used smart. If she had come into the king and said, "King, Haman wants to kill us and I want you to get rid of him," what would that have done? It would have put the king on defensive. "This is my second in command. Who are you? You just became queen." He is from the lineage of kings. Did you know that? Haman was also of a lineage of kings, hidden in the story from us, but he was a king. She smartly brings up the plot to kill her people, and then says who the accuser was. Like God is hidden in Esther, the book, her lineage, her attributes, and who she was hidden also throughout the passages of Esther. So, Shabbat Shalom.